For the first time in modern memory, an entire generation is bragging online about how little they own. A 5-year-old iPhone to pairs of jeans worn until they fall apart, a skincare shelf with 3 products instead of 40. Across TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, young people are showing off worn-out shoes and bare apartments the way previous generations once showed off designer handbags. The trend even has a name. It is called Underconsumption core, and it is reshaping the entire luxury industry from the ground up. Stick around because the reasons behind this shift go far beyond aesthetics. The impact on global brands has only just begun, and what comes next may change how an entire generation defines wealth itself. What is Underconsumption core? The trend first exploded on TikTok in the summer of 2024. Videos began appearing with the hashtag #UnderconsumptionCore, showing young women filming their tiny bathrooms with only a few skincare products on the shelf. Within weeks, the trend had spread to closets, kitchens, and entire apartments. Young men joined in with videos showing their 3-shirt wardrobes and decade-old game consoles. Some creators began making no-buy videos, where they pledged not to spend money on anything outside of food, rent, and basic bills for an entire year. The most popular of those creators have gathered followings in the millions, posting weekly updates that read more like recovery journals than shopping hauls. The aesthetic was the opposite of the polished social media of the late 2010s and early 2020s. Instead of marble countertops and matching skincare bottles, it celebrated old furniture, mismatched dishes, and visible signs of repair. Cracked phone screens, patched jeans, and coffee mugs from a decade ago. The look was deliberately unpolished, and that was the entire point. Critics quickly pointed out that for many young people, this aesthetic was not really a choice, it was a financial reality. Rent was at historic highs, student debt was crushing, and inflation had pushed the cost of groceries and basic goods to levels their parents had never faced at the same age. But that is exactly what made the trend so powerful. Instead of trying to hide that reality, an entire generation was choosing to make it the new flex. Posts about turning broken items into something useful or wearing the same outfit on camera multiple times in a row racked up millions of views almost overnight. Why is Gen Z rejecting luxury so dramatically? For the past 3 decades, luxury brands had been booming. Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Prada, and dozens of other names had built their growth on selling status symbols to a global middle class that wanted to look richer than it actually was. Influencer culture turned designer logos into a daily display. By 2022, the luxury industry was worth more than $350 billion worldwide, with millions of new buyers entering the market every single year. Then something shifted. Reports from major fashion analysts started showing that Gen Z customers were buying fewer luxury items than any generation before them at the same age. A 2024 study from a major consulting firm found that Gen Z shoppers were postponing or skipping luxury purchases at nearly double the rate of millennials. Major brands like Burberry, Kering, and LVMH began posting weaker quarterly results, and their stock prices reflected the change. There were several reasons. Economic anxiety played a big role. So did the rise of dupe culture, where young shoppers proudly showed off cheaper alternatives to expensive products. Climate concerns also pushed many young people away from fast fashion and toward longer-lasting items. The fashion industry alone is responsible for nearly 10% of all global carbon emissions, a statistic that has become impossible for younger shoppers to ignore. But the most important reason was psychological. After watching millennials burn out trying to keep up with social media flexes, Gen Z had decided not to play the same game. Owning less became a way of opting out of an entire system. It was rebellion dressed up in old sneakers, and for many young people, it felt like the first form of resistance that actually fit their daily lives. The fact that the rebellion was free, instead of requiring yet another purchase, only made it spread faster across every corner of the internet. How is this changing brands and the economy? The first wave of impact has already hit major luxury houses. LVMH, the world's largest luxury conglomerate, reported one of its slowest growth years in 2020 since the financial crisis. Younger consumers in China, the United States, and Europe all cut back at the same time. Some brands tried to respond by raising prices even further to maintain exclusivity. Others launched cheaper sublines aimed at younger shoppers, hoping to bring them back without giving up the luxury aura. A few brands shifted focus entirely toward older, wealthier customers who were less affected by these trends. Smaller secondhand markets exploded as a result. Apps like Depop, Vinted, and Poshmark reported record growth as young people both sold their old clothes and bought from each other. Thrift store visits in major cities like New York, London, and Tokyo became something close to a weekend hobby. The vintage market, once a niche corner of fashion, became one of the fastest growing parts of the industry. Resale platforms began outpacing traditional retail in some categories of clothing and accessories. Even tech companies felt the pressure. Apple has reported softer demand for new phone upgrades in younger demographics. Many Gen Z users are now holding on to their phones for 4 or 5 years at a time, instead of upgrading annually as their parents once did. The repair industry around screens, batteries, and laptop parts has grown rapidly in response. Right-to-repair laws have spread to more states and countries, partly driven by younger voters who refuse to throw away devices that can still be fixed. Marketing teams across the industry began studying the trend in 2024 and 2025, trying to figure out how to sell things to a generation that had decided it does not want to buy more of them. Some agencies started building campaigns around minimalism, durability, and repair, trying to use Gen Z's values to sell new products. Whether that strategy actually works long-term remains an open question, and many young people see through the marketing within seconds. Is this trend real or just another phase? Cultural movements come and go. Quiet luxury came and went within a few years. Minimalism rose and faded in the early 2010s. Some critics argue that underconsumption core is the same kind of cycle, and that within 5 years, Gen Z will be back to spending heavily as their incomes rise and their lives stabilize. But there are reasons to think this shift may last longer than most. The economic conditions driving the trend are not temporary. Housing affordability is unlikely to improve quickly. Wages have not kept up with the cost of living for most workers. Climate awareness is growing, not shrinking. Artificial intelligence is now threatening many of the entry-level white-collar jobs that previous generations relied on to launch their careers, which adds even more financial caution to the mix. There is also a psychological shift to consider. Many young people now associate visible consumption with anxiety, debt, and emotional emptiness. They have watched older creators break down on camera while surrounded by piles of brand deals and unboxings. For them, buying less feels less like sacrifice and more like protection. If this video helped you understand the shift happening in real time, hit that like button and subscribe for more breakdowns of the trends shaping the next decade.